I was, besides, endued with a figure hideously deformed and loathsome. I was not even of the same nature as man. I was more agile than they, and could subsist upon coarser diet. I bore the extremes of heat and cold with less injury to my frame. My stature far exceeded theirs. When I looked around, I saw and heard of none like me. Was I then a monster, a blot upon the earth from which all men fled, and whom all men disowned? I cannot describe to you the agony that these reflections inflicted upon me. I tried to dispel them, but sorrow only increased with knowledge. Hello. Hi. How are you? Do you as well feel that whenever you look around, you see and hear none like you? Well, me too. I often feel like that. And not just because of my green skin.
Boo! You suck!
I felt like that ever since I was a lot younger. I was always the odd girl out. I was always the weird one.
Anyway, I thought I was onto something. I was just yapping.
And trust me, this is going somewhere. Just hold on tight. Hold my hands. Hold my hands. Holding my hands. We're gonna get through this together. Just take a deep breath. It's going somewhere, I promise. Okay, sorry, now that I had my fun little thing, my little moment, I'm going to be talking about disability and horror today, and how those two overlap. I understand that there are two kind of approaches, or different ideas, ideologies, what have you, I guess, two theories, that's a better word, to interpreting disability, and that is like a medical or pathology theory, pathology paradigm, versus a social paradigm. And when it comes to a medical paradigm, what it often looks like is that the disabled person is disabled by abnormalities or XYZ conditions within their person. They're disabled by these things within them. And then the social model is essentially that this disabled person is disabled by their environment and its physical, attitudinal, communication, social barriers. Essentially, the social model is that a person is disabled by their environment. Hi, this is editing Emily taking over, and you're going to be hearing a lot from me. Much like Wendigoon says, I thought I was onto something, but I was just yapping. And I found that to be the case quite a bit in this video. So I've come in to save the day and try to make sense of things as of right now, and I'll definitely come back a couple times later throughout this video. Also, you're probably going to see a shift in scenery and setting from time to time, but don't worry about it and don't think about it too hard. Hi, how are you? I hope you're well. Maybe it's just me, but there seems to be a very, very heavy overlap between horror and disability. Maybe it is just me, but I don't think it's just me. As a disabled person, I grew up feeling very alienated, like I didn't really fit in with other people. I always felt like I was the weird girl, and shocker, I bet you wouldn't guess that. And as I've gotten a lot older and I've learned a lot more about the world and a lot more about disability and a lot more about horror, is that there is so much overlap and there are so many things that just intertwine, and how horror is one of the best ways, in my opinion, to really encapsulate disability. So this was a really good take that I had and that I have, but I didn't really go into a lot of detail on it. So I'm going ahead and doing that right now. So the reason why I believe that horror is such a excellent, I guess, tool to display disability and what disability is like is because horror revolves around two main things, at least in my mind: abnormality and vulnerability. In horror, abnormal is seen as scary or bad. You see this even in Frankenstein, because Frankenstein, Fritz actually, Fritz chooses the abnormal brain that Frankenstein puts in the monster. hence why Frankenstein is quote-unquote abnormal and bad and scary. And moreover, vulnerability in horror is seen as dangerous, because when you're vulnerable, you can be taken advantage of. And abnormality and vulnerability are two very large aspects of disability, because, like I said, with the medical model of disability, or pathological or pathology model of disability, abnormality is considered a part of disability, and disabled people are often considered a vulnerable population. And because of the frequent usage of abnormality and vulnerability in horror and how they're associated with disability, disability is often used in horror as a tool to make a villain bad or something like that. And I'll go into this a little bit later, but essentially what I was trying to say is that because horror uses so much abnormality and vulnerability to induce fear in people, like in body horror, which I will go into in just a second, there is this heavy association between disability and abnormality and vulnerability in horror, and they become more associated in film, and essentially disability, vicariously through its association in horror, becomes associated with the quote-unquote scary bad things and the dangerous things about abnormality and vulnerability that are displayed in horror. And because of this association, we keep kind of just like following, a lot like the social role model, or social role theory, sorry, is that we just kind of keep following in our own footsteps unknowingly. It's like this really yucky kind of cycle that we all fall victim to. We can see this really easily in like The Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka. A lot of people state that is a very solid metaphor of disability, and how, Gregor is changing into this cockroach, and he is now viewed as just disgusting. His family abuses him. His family doesn't want to be around him, take care of him, just because he is now unable to do these certain tasks. He is incapable. He is now incompetent. And he begins to even see himself that way, as this grotesque creature or this disgusting being, right? And one very prominent theme in horror is body horror. And that is exactly what it sounds like, is that your body is changing. It is like becoming grotesque and disgusting. Your body is changing into something that it has never been before. And a really, really good example of this, one of my personal favorite films, is The Fly by David Cronenberg. I cannot recall Jeff Goldblum's character's name, so I'm just going to call him Jeff. So he decides to create this transportation device where you can, hop in, blah, 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 right? So he's testing it out, and a little fly flies into it, and it gets stuck in there. And then all of a sudden, his DNA becomes morphed with the fly DNA. After that, Jeff Goldblum, his DNA gets fused with this fly. It's a relatively kind of slow start process where it's just very few things will start to change. Like, he starts to grow like a lot more, I guess, like whiskery type things, like a lot more like facial hair things. I don't know how to describe them, but like, cause like how like flies have like the little like prickly things on them. It's like they started to grow like just out of his skin, and at first it was a lot more subtle. It was easy to, it was easy to hide. It was not as recognizable, but then it's a very, very slow but climactic decrease in function and contrast into what he used to be to what he is now. And he succumbs to becoming the fly, and at the end you see him being the fly. You see him as the fly. He turns into this quote-unquote monstrous, disgusting creature that like spews up acid. It's really gross and disgusting because it's Cronenberg, but it's he's turned into something that is not himself, something that is like everybody's worst fear, which is losing yourself. And that is why it's so scary. That's why the metamorphosis is so scary, because it's this progressive fear of losing yourself and being something that is so quote unquote inhumane, abnormal, not typical, but something that is just so disgusting and wrong in the eyes of many people. That is a true fear, because we all value a universal human acceptance, right? And I feel like that is just general. We all want to be accepted. We all want to be, at the very least, understood. And to be shunned away just because of how you look is awful and terrible, but it is something that is unfortunately very, very true, because it happens very frequently. Is that horror is this really great way to encapsulate a fear of losing yourself, becoming something that is so far from yourself, or becoming something that only exists in the shadows. Much like Gregor Samsa, what happened to him is he would just then live under his bed. He lived in the shadows. And at the end, that's kind of what's just implied with Jeff Goldblum in The Fly, is he's just this thing. And he just is alone now, and he lives, like I keep saying, he lives in the shadows. He becomes this thing that is hidden away, you know, not to be seen, not to be spoken about. And you see that also a lot in various films when it comes to disabilities. Like in, I believe, Pet Sematary, the one from like the 90s or 80s, not the recent one, but I'm pretty sure it's in the recent one. But in the one from the 90s and 80s, I believe that it's the mother's sister. She has a very, very, very horrible, serious case of meningitis. And her sister was essentially locked away and never talked about in like the guest bedroom. Nobody was allowed to go in there except for the parents and the mother, or her sister essentially, to take care of her. But it's this fear of something that is so not normal, right? And as a disabled person, that's something that I find very intriguing, but I simultaneously feel at home with, because I can really connect with these monsters. And I'm not the only one. I've come across many people that feel very connected to these various strands of horror or these monsters in lots of different ways, because of this understanding of seeing where the overlap of prejudice and discrimination that we see in everyday life is very evident in Frankenstein and Freaks from 1932, which are two films that I'm going to talk a little bit more in depth about in just a second. But yeah, stay tuned, and I hope that you enjoy the ride. Like I said, I'll be talking about Frankenstein, the 1931 film, and I'm going to be talking about Freaks. So first off, with Frankenstein, an adaptation of the 1818 novel by Mary Shelley, tells the story of Dr. Frankenstein and his creation of a monster. And the monster is essentially a bunch of reanimated corpses put together, or a reanimated bundle of corpses, in short. And I've only seen the film. I'm so sorry. I know I've read the book. I'm so sorry, but I will soon. I have it right here, and I've read parts of it. I just haven't read it in its whole. Similar to, as I discussed with David Cronenberg's The Fly and Franz Kafka's Metamorphosis, there is a sense of knowing that something is wrong, knowing that you don't fit in amongst everyone else. It's a hard book and it's a hard story, because it is a monster who is non-speaking and is just trying to navigate the world without any sense of direction, any ability to communicate, and limited understanding of the world around him. In the film specifically, there's the one scene where he goes and plays with the little girl Maria. And this is the only time in the film that you see somebody treat Frankenstein like an actual human. She was just like, oh, what's your name? My name's Maria. Do you want to play with me? And the monster's like, oh, yeah, sure. Well, he doesn't say that, but it's there. And he's just so happy to see that somebody wants to interact, somebody wants to play with him, somebody wants to interact with him, somebody doesn't see him as less than or bad just because he looks different. And what hurts a lot about this scene is you can really tell that the monster is very much trying to play properly with this little girl. But he ends up, they're throwing flowers into the water. And he ends up, they both run out of flowers, so he throws her into the water. And I have a whole other thing on this because personally, as parents of a little girl, and you live right next to a large body of water, why didn't you teach your child how to swim? I digress. But immediately he freaks out because he notices that something is wrong, but he doesn't know what's wrong. And he's like looking around like, oh my God, like, what do I do? What do I do? And he runs off. And at least I interpreted that as him running to go get help because he knows that something is wrong, but he doesn't know what to do. He doesn't know how to help her. He doesn't know how to tell her, it's okay, I can help you. Because nobody gave him the chance to learn that. Nobody taught him that. And, yeah, it's really, 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 really sad, is because they're viewing Frankenstein, the monster, oh my gosh, they're viewing the monster as a very low competence, but simultaneously has this high warmth aspect of him. And we see this a lot. I'm looking at my notes, hold on. My goodness, where is it? With Fiske's stereotype content model. So Fiske's stereotype content model, it is essentially a 4-panel grid between competence and warmth, and you have high warmth and low competence, and within that category is usually where disabled individuals fall. And that's where but that's where we are seeing Frankenstein fall.
Anyway, I thought I was onto something. I was just yapping.
Okay, so moving on to Freaks. So this movie has an entirely different vibe to it. And as a matter of fact, I think that this film is a very, 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 very good depiction of disabled people. And let me tell you why. So remember the stereotype content model that I was just talking about? How disabled individuals are usually viewed as people that have very high warmth but very low competence? Freaks does the opposite, baby. Sorry, I'm really excited because I watched this film. So this film was originally banned because it was actually created as an anti-eugenics movement film. That's right, baby. Anti-eugenics movement. Sorry, this film makes me very, very happy because they cast disabled individuals as disabled individuals. And like that's something that you never really see. And that was incredibly progressive for 1932. So much so, dude, we're barely even doing that now in 2024, okay? I have a lot to say about this film. And I think it was leagues better than Frankenstein. And I'm going to tell you why. Like I said, it was banned, and it was banned specifically for its grotesque content. It's really not that grotesque, okay? The only reason that it would be considered grotesque is because you are seeing disabled individuals live their lives and do everyday things. So essentially in this film it follows a set of quote-unquote freaks, as they called themselves, that live and work on like a circus, traveling circus thing. And there's this one character named Cleopatra, and you know, she's this very tall, beautiful, I believe she's French woman. And there's a lot of other able-bodied people that are in the circus that like the strong men and XYZ that are very conventionally attractive, right? Then they are able-bodied. However, the freaks themselves, as they call themselves, and I'm calling them that because that's what they call themselves, have a very beautiful relationship where they are very, very united together. They have, well, I mean, this is the, if you've ever heard of like,
They'll make her one of us, A loving cup, a loving cup. We accept a one of us. We accept a one of us.
Gooba gobble, gooba gobble.
We accept her, we accept her. Google gobble, Google gobble. One of us.
A close-knit, tight-knit community. And the premise of the film is that Cleopatra is essentially seeking marriage with one individual that has dwarfism. And this individual, has dwarfism, he's very short, and he is being taken advantage of by Cleopatra because he potentially has this very, very large fortune and she's money hungry. And she's very, very vain, and she's portrayed as vain and shallow because her character is. And what's very intriguing is that in Freaks, this is one of the only instances where disabled individuals are treated like people. And not only are they treated like people, but they are doing everyday things that like anyone else would do. And they're being shown doing those things, just living their lives. And I think that that's incredible. But what is so interesting is because essentially it ends up, I don't want to spoil the film, but essentially what ends up happening is that the freaks learn that Cleopatra is trying to take advantage of them and try to take advantage of one of them. Right? Okay. And so I don't want to spoil the movie because it's so good. But in this film, the freaks are the regular, quote-unquote regular people, whereas the able-bodied people like Cleopatra and the strongmen are the true monsters because they are taking advantage of these other individuals and they are preying upon them. One other thing that I forgot to mention is how incredibly, and I mean incredibly, like incredibly prejudiced able-bodied people are to the freaks in this film. There are one or two able-bodied people that are particularly kind to them. I think 3 in total, and the freaks are, you know, accepting of them and kind towards them, and they don't let the prejudice that other able-bodied people show them impact their perception of able-bodied people who are non-prejudiced towards them. So that's also something that is a large focal point in the film. Once again, I cannot mention watching this film enough. I think it's very good, very educational, wonderful cast, and you can watch it for free on Tubi, and I'm pretty sure you can watch it for free on the Internet Archive as well. And Freaks is just such an incredible film because it is such a strong rejection of the stereotype content model because, yeah, these freaks, they are incredibly high warmth, but they are also incredibly competent. And honestly, that's what's actually true of many disabled individuals. They are high warmth and high competence. They can take care of themselves. They can do whatever they put their mind to. Essentially, they likely can. They probably will just have to do it differently and at a different pace than other people. But that doesn't make them any less than, you know, it doesn't make them a freak. If they identify as a freak, then let them be a freak. You know? Who says no? Who says they can't? If that's what makes them happy, let them do it. Anyways, I really, really, really enjoyed that film. Not only is it a wonderful, wonderful anti-eugenics movement film, because, oh my god, the eugenics movement and scientific ableism is really something else, because it so strongly rejects that. So strongly rejects it.
Anyway, I thought I was onto something. I was just yapping.
Okay, so essentially for this last little part, what I would like to do is to just get all of the strings together, tie it all up, and try to make it make sense, if that makes sense. There's a very, 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 very incredibly apparent association in horror between abnormality, or what is considered abnormal, and disability, and bad. We see this through many of the slashers. being portrayed, or at least canonically being considered, disabled. That it's like two of the most prominent examples that come to my mind are Jason Voorhees and Bubba Sawyer. However, with Bubba Sawyer, it's incredibly interesting, and I have this quote from I believe the director of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. He was talking about, and I'm just going to read this official quote. "Leatherface was originally scripted to have several lines of dialogue. Filmmakers were dissatisfied with the resulting scene. It made the character, Leatherface, seem too rational and was rewritten to fit the filmmaker's vision of a demented and mentally disabled maniac." And I find that incredibly interesting because it only emboldens the already existing association between nonverbality, non-speakingness, apparent disability and abnormality, and evil and bad. And in my mind, it's almost like incredibly apparent that we are falling into this circle, this paradox that we are facilitating ourselves. Okay, and as I'm getting really into this, I'm getting a little too excited about this, it's really kind of exemplifies, in my opinion, the social role theory, Eagly's social role theory. And essentially what the social role theory is saying is that characteristics of roles are associated with an individual occupying it. So in this case, the role could be like bad or bad, slasher. Basically, essentially, in this instance, the role would be like bad, disabled individual, right? And these characteristics could be associated with this, at least in the instance of horror, are disability, non-verbality, non-speaking, right? And because physical differences can impact role assignment, right, as in this theory, social role assignment will yield psychological differences in the way that we are perceiving individuals to be prescribed these roles. Like, I mean, it's almost like it's writing itself. It's like, I don't know, you couldn't see Barack Obama going and being Jason Voorhees. Why? Because he's a very esteemed person that was the president of the United States for 2 terms, you know? You wouldn't see, like, I mean, I can't really think of anyone else off the top of my head. I don't know why Barack Obama came. But, like, you know, I could never see Barack Obama being, like, Freddy Krueger. I could never see him being Leatherface because he is a well-esteemed individual. He is accomplished. In my eyes, he's good, right? And I think that that's something that's fair to assume for many individuals, is that there's this very easy and apparent association between what is abnormal, what is not normal, and bad, because we are constantly seeing it portrayed together. And one thing that I find so particularly interesting is the role of Freaks in this. Because, like I said, Freaks was an anti-eugenics film from 1932. And in this film, I will say the Freaks do commit some crime. Let's just say that. They are committing some crime. But the crime that they are committing, it is not without reason. That's all I'm going to say, is they had a very good, solid reason to commit these crimes. And it's almost like one of the reasons why this was banned, not only was it because it was an anti-eugenics film, but also because it portrayed disabled individuals in the clear. They were the protagonists. They were level-headed. They were smart. I say were because this film was in 1932. They are most definitely dead now, and I'm breast empower people. Anyways, but it's because they so strongly portray disabled individuals in a way that was so against the norm, against expectation, that we almost don't want to acknowledge that. And that's something that we rarely see being encountered over and over again. And in modern day, when there are disabled people cast in films, it almost feels fetishistic. It feels as pandering. It's like, did you really actually care that these people are disabled, that these disabled people, do you see them just as their disability? Or are you just casting them only for their disability, not because of their talent? Is it just for increasing diversity? Which is obviously incredibly important. And I am all for increasing, you know, diversity in film, and I am absolutely all for casting disabled actors. But it's also in the sense of, are you making this film, are you casting disabled people in this film because you want disabled people in this film? Or are you casting it because, or are you casting them because you know that if you don't, you will receive backlash, and it will be seen as discrimination against disabled people and disabled actors? Are you doing it because you, I don't know. It's a very, very, very interesting paradox, a very, very interesting thing. And I hope that I have left you, all of you, with something to think about at the end of this video. I'm going to try and trim it down, but absolutely no promises. Okay. Once again, thank you for listening, and bye!